Hello everyone. In this short video, I'm going to talk about how to confront the trade-offs based on the projected outcomes of your policy alternatives. So this is the sixth step of the eightfold in policy analysis. So the first thing is you need to know what is trade-off. A trade-off means you have several things that you want to weigh to decide which one is actually the best. So when should we confront the trade-offs? Suppose you got all the outcomes projected based on the criteria of each of your alternatives. Then it's probably a good time for you to confront the trade-offs. However, if for every single evaluative and practical criterion, alternative 1 is expected to produce a better outcome than any of your other alternatives, then should you still confront the trade-offs? The answer is no, because you already know alternative 1 is the best because it excels based on every single criterion. So this will be ideal, right? So that will make your policy analysis work much easier. However, in reality, unfortunately, you probably will have something like this, right? Alternative 1 excels based on criteria A, B, C, while alternative 2 excels in criteria Y, X, Y, Z. But then you have an issue because criteria A, B, C is different from criteria X, Y, and Z. So how can you reconcile if criteria are different from each other? Now, one of the things we needed to do is focus on the outcomes. So is this a good trade-off confrontation? For example, if you are trading off 20 foot patrol police officers in the late 9 hours against a lower maintenance cost fleet of police vehicles. So we need to truly understand what are the outcomes. So alternatives must first be converted into outcomes before you can actually confront the trade-offs. So let's say you have an example, say 50 burglars per year prevented by the foot patrol officers versus a saving of 300,000 in fleet maintenance, right? So on the one hand, you have the alternative 1 is increasing the foot patrol officers, right, which could prevent 50 burglars per year. While on the other hand, if you provide or choose the fleet low-cost fleet option, it will have a saving of $300,000 in maintenance fees. All right, so basically all the things are like this when you need to confront a trade-off. In the previous example, 50 burglars prevented versus saving of 300,000 maintenance fees in fleet. So which one will be the bad one, right? As we said, everyone have their own value system, right? So based on their own judgments, they could come up with different policy recommendations because their standpoint or their personal experience and their value system, etc. Or they consider all the things together and try to strike a balance, then come up with something, in between. It all depends on the policy analysis, value judgment system, and other things the policy analysis considered. Okay, so then basically what we are saying is, unless this is quite obvious based on all the criteria, one option excels than the others. Otherwise, you are really asking the policy analysis to come up with something that based on their own judgment. All right. So in In other words, there's no right or wrong answers in policy analysis. Only you need to consider all the things, all the criteria, right? Whether or not is it feasible, is it improvable, is it sustainable, etc. These are practical issues in your consideration. All right, here's some more examples, right? So as you can see, when you confront trade-offs, it could be between money and the civil service. Right? Someone value government budget because it's more practical, while the others say, okay, the basic service must be provided because it's related to basic human rights. So what's the right thing to do? Again, it could be between private costs and social benefits, especially in regulation, right? Pollution versus life. Now, on the one hand, if you think about this is more about efficiency, it's still the efficiency versus the value of life, right? Human rights. And also between different criteria, right? Especially your outcome efficiency is based on evaluative one, while the other thing may be more in the line with like political acceptability, whether or not this is politically acceptable, right? Maybe it's efficient, but someone may not agree with that, right? So it's especially when it's a partisan issue, then obviously it's more difficult for you to think about this. All right, so here's my illustration to show you. Sometimes it's just needed to force you to think about how you're gonna confront the trade-offs. Why we needed to do that, right? For example, A1 means alternative 1, A2 means alternative 2, A3 means alternative 3, alternative 4 is A4. Okay, C1 and the CA means C1 means the criteria is selected from the evaluative side, and the CA means the the criteria is from the practical side. So A1 may be excel based on C1 efficiency and legality. A2 may excel if based on criteria freedom and political acceptability, while A3 may be excel based on equity, justice, and administrative robustness, while A4 may excel based on process values as well as policy sustainability. So then, which one is the best? Right. So you needed to project the outcome based on different criteria first. Then you can really consider, okay, which one is really the best. Okay, so some of the things you may think about when confronting the trade-offs. So you should probably revisit the break-even analysis. We talked about this in projecting the outcome step. And then you frame the trade-off crisply and say, okay, it is a statistical life, which means on average a person worth $2 million, because what we are talking about here is very practical, right? So eventually you may say, okay, we can't put a value on people's life. That's in principle, I would agree with that. But in reality, operationalize it in practice, right? You are forced. So say if you're a judge or if you're a jury member, right? So you're forced to put a number eventually on a person's life if that has to be settled in the court, right? So eventually, in reality, you are going to put a number on it, even though you think in principle that's not something can be priced, especially human lives. All right, so the trade-off thing is really, force you to make a decision when, even though the decision is very difficult to make. All right, so the other trade-offs are also related to incrementalism, right? So if an extra X dollar for an extra unit Y service, then we'll got the unit outcome. Is this worth it? Right? So then you would say, okay, now this is basically the cost-benefit analysis, right? Do the society or both parties value the outcome, the units, more than X dollars in costs? If it's a yes, then that maybe then you decide for another unit of Y, because the incrementalism, right? You increase, but the outcome outweigh the costs. But if it's not, which means maybe the society doesn't value that, right? It won't be a bipartisan support. Then it probably will not get through the Congress. So even you value it, it's probably not practical. All right, again, because if you are confronting the trade-offs, most likely you are going to use the outcomes. So if quantifiable, then quantify them, compare the numbers is much easier. Right? If they can't be quantified, rank the order or categorize them into different ordered categories. So even though you cannot quite quantify them, but still it gives you some basis for you to make a comparison. All right, so I think that's all for this short video. I hope by far you understand how you can confront the trade-offs. All right, it's not an easy decision to make, but you need to make it based on all the outcomes you projected, based on all the evaluative and practical criteria you applied of all the alternatives. All right, thank you very much.